Hello, everyone. Mr. Eford here. Hope that you guys are doing well. Coming at you today with another lesson about ancient Egypt. We are going to continue on. And today we are going to be focused on the government of ancient Egypt, what some of those pharaohs were like, what they were known for. We're also going to break Egypt up into those three different time periods: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. We're going to get to talk about some cool stuff today. So as we get started, my students at home, please remember that you are expected to follow along, take the notes that are attached along with the Kami document in Canvas. Make sure that you fill in those blanks, and I will attach the slideshow that we're going through as well so that you can go through at your own pace if you need to a little bit later on. So with that being said, we got a lot to cover. We are going to go ahead and get started. All right, so just as a matter of review, we need to talk about how ancient Egypt developed. Remember that around 4000 BC, Egypt is made up of two separate kingdoms. These are found, they're called Upper and Lower Egypt. Lower Egypt is at the Nile Delta. And remember, it sounds backwards because Lower Egypt is actually in the north, Upper Egypt is actually in the south. We talked about Narmer, and we talked about how he brought those two kingdoms together in the last lesson. But remember, this is how Egypt starts. Okay. All right, moving into the Old Kingdom. Around 2600 BC, the period known as the Old Kingdom began in Egypt. This is our first sort of time period that we look at the history of Egypt in. The Old Kingdom lasted until around 2300 BC, so about 300 years. The Pharaoh was considered an all-powerful ruler who guided Egypt's every activity. His word was law, had to be obeyed without question. Remember that in Old Egypt, or the Old Kingdom of Egypt, that the Pharaoh is viewed as a living God, right? He's a deity. He is a supreme being. And so the people of Egypt would have to follow his word, his commandments, without question. All right, Egypt's religion. Egyptians believed in many gods. I'm going to pause right there. And again, I'm going to continue to repeat some of these vocabulary words that we use in our content. That's called polytheism. Remember, poly means many, theism means belief in God, so a belief in many gods and goddesses. The Egyptians, just like the Mesopotamians, believed in hundreds of deities, lots of gods and goddesses. They believed in an afterlife or life after death, especially for the Pharaoh. We're going to talk about those pyramids, why that was important, and how that ties in with the beliefs about the Pharaoh, about the afterlife, and about what would take place after the death of a person. So in many ways, this is very similar to the Mesopotamian religious beliefs. Egyptians believed that their deities, their gods and goddesses, controlled the forces of nature and human activities. Okay? And the main Egyptian god is the sun god. His name was Ra. Okay? All right, so Egyptian religion continued here. Another major god was the god Hapi, which ruled the Nile River. So he's the god of the Nile River. The most important goddess was Isis. She represented the loyal wife and mother. She ruled over the dead with her husband Osiris. There was a belief in life in the next world and that it would be even better than life on earth. Okay, so similar to a reward in the afterlife. If you live a good life, good things will follow. This is unlike the Mesopotamians who believed that life was gloomy after death, right? They just thought everything was doom and gloom. All right, Egypt's religion continued here. For centuries, Egyptians believed that only the Pharaoh and a special few people could enjoy the afterlife. It wasn't meant for everyone. They also believed that the Pharaoh's spirit needed a body to make the journey to the afterlife in. To protect the Pharaoh's body, the Egyptians developed the process called embalming. This is where we get into mummification, where they try to preserve the dead body. This goes back to the Egyptian belief in the Ka and the Ba, the two different parts of a person's physical being, that you had the physical body and then you had the spirit or the soul, that were two separate parts of a person, and that they both needed each other. In other words, a person's spirit or soul could not go on if their body didn't exist. So the embalming process is what preserves the body and keeps it from deteriorating, keeps it from rotting. All right, Egyptian medicine. In the course of embalming the dead, the Egyptians learned a lot about the human body. Remember, they're cutting out organs, they're doing things like that. They figured out a lot about what makes a human being work the way that we work, what our different organs were used for. Egyptian doctors used herbs and drugs to treat many different illnesses. They grew very skilled at sewing up cuts, in other words, giving stitches, setting broken bones. These were all things that Egyptian doctors could do fairly well. Some doctors focused on treating particular parts of the body. In other words, becoming a specialist in their area. Just like now, you would go to a specialist who might deal with ear, eye, nose, and throat. You wouldn't go to them with a broken bone, but if you had an ear infection or something was wrong with your throat, you would go to that specialist. Egyptians would have doctors that specialized in particular types of medicine. And this was the first time we kind of see this happen in history here. All right, Egyptian medicine here, okay. Some of the first medical books are recorded on papyrus scrolls. We haven't really talked about papyrus very much at this point in time, but papyrus is a type of paper made by the Egyptians where they took reeds, the papyrus reed from the banks of the Nile River, and they would cut it into thin strips, and they would overlay these strips with one another and press it into a form of paper that they could then write on. And this is how the Egyptians recorded their written history, was on papyrus scrolls. All right, the pyramids. This is one of the most interesting parts of ancient Egypt. And I shared a video with you guys last week where we looked at the construction of the pyramid. It still blows my mind that something that massive, that big, was constructed over 4,600 years ago and was done with primitive tools. It boggles the mind to think about how they moved those huge stones, some of them weighing in excess of 15 tons, and setting those into position where the outside of the pyramid is so well put together. Those stones are so well laid that you couldn't even fit a piece of paper into the joint between those stones. It's absolutely amazing that the Egyptians were able to do that. The pyramids are gigantic structures, and that's an understatement. They are massive, the size of several city blocks. They protected the bodies of dead pharaohs from floods, wild animals, and to an extent, they tried to protect the pharaoh from grave robbers. Now, that unfortunately was unsuccessful. Grave robbers were able to break into the pyramids and steal the treasures which were hidden within. The pyramids also held supplies, excuse me, they held supplies that the pharaoh might need in the afterlife, in the spirit world. These things included clothing, furniture, jewelry, food, even games and transportation. One of the things we talked about in the previous video is that we've actually found boats buried by the pyramids for the pharaohs to be able to use as they were transported on the Duat, which is the river that followed the sun god Ra's travel through the skies. So the pharaohs were buried with all the things that they might need in the afterlife. Most of the work building the pyramids was done by farmers. It was not done by slaves, okay? And that's one of the common misconceptions about Egypt. It was actually farmers and hired workers who did the construction of the pyramid. They would build during the flood season, as the farmers can't really do anything on their land as far as planting or harvesting while the Nile River is flooded. So they would go and work on the pyramids during this time. In addition, surveyors, engineers, carpenters, and stonecutters all lent their skills. And it took all of these Egyptians working together to create something as big and as amazing as the pyramids. The pyramids have a square base, okay, and the entrance is facing to the north. And then, of course, those sloping sides that go up to the peak are triangular. So square base, triangular sides, four sides, all going up to a peak is that pyramid shape. All right, skilled artisans and copper tools used copper tools to cut the stone into huge blocks. Other workers tied the blocks to wooden sleds and then pulled them up to the Nile over a path, which was paved by logs. That way the stone could kind of roll as you're pulling it. Okay. Next, they loaded the stones onto barges, which transported them to the building site. There, the workers would unload the blocks and drag or push them up ramps to set them into place. And that's one of the things that is most hard to wrap our brains around, is how they got those rocks, how those stones were placed, especially as you get up toward the top of the pyramid, which is several hundred feet up above the desert floor. How do you get those stones, which weigh over a ton, up to the top? And in the video that we watched previously, we do see some of the ideas and theories about how the ramp could have curved around the pyramid to get those stones up to the very peak of the pyramid. All right. Around 2540 BC, the Egyptians built the largest and grandest pyramid of all, known as the Great Pyramid in Egypt. And for about 4,300 years, this was the tallest structure on planet Earth, which was man-made. This was built for the pharaoh Khufu, who's one of three standing pyramids in Giza. That's the town where the pyramids are located. So on the west bank of the Nile, West Bank is important because the Egyptians, the east where the sun rises is representative of life and birth. The west where the sun sets is symbolic of death. Okay, as the sun's going down, it's like the death of the day. And so people were buried on the west side of the Nile River. The pyramid rises nearly 500 feet above the desert floor, which is mind-boggling, right? It covers an area about the size of 9 football fields and contains more than 2 million stone blocks. Again, each one of those blocks weighing more than a ton, which is amazing when you think about the size and weight and mass of what was put together there. The Great Pyramid was the tallest structure in the world for more than 4,000 years. And it is one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world as well. The Great Pyramid is truly a marvelous structure because the Egyptians built it without using beasts of burden. In other words, people moved those blocks. It wasn't drawn by ox or horses or anything like that. They were moved by human beings. Okay? They didn't use special tools. They had copper tools, which were easily bent, broken. We believe that it probably took a whole team of people who just constantly repaired tools as the pyramids were being built for these structures to be able to go up. They didn't even have the use of the wheel when they built the pyramid. So amazing that they could construct something like this with ancient tools. Okay. Here we go. All right, so moving from the Old Kingdom to the Middle Kingdom, we've stopped building pyramids by the time we get to the Middle Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom is known as the Golden Age of Egypt. It's peaceful, it's prosperous. There are advances in art and architecture, very little fighting, very little war. Egypt just grows during this time period, and it's a good time to be a person living in Egypt. Life is good. Okay. Around 2300 BC, the pharaohs lost control of Egypt, though. Nobles battled one another for power, and for almost 200 years, there was confusion. And then a new dynasty of pharaohs came to power. All right, and this is where the new kingdom, or the Middle Kingdom starts, is when that new dynasty comes in and restores order, brings Egypt back kind of to where it needs to be at this point in time. They moved their capital south from where the capital was in the Old Kingdom, which was Memphis, and they moved it to a city called Thebes. There, excuse me, they restored order and stability. They ushered in a new period called the Middle Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom lasts from around 2050 BC to about 1670 BC. During this time, Egyptians enjoyed the golden age of stability, prosperity, and achievement. Again, life is good in Egypt during the Middle Kingdom. Excuse me there. All right, Middle Kingdom continued. Pharaohs added more waterways and dams. In other words, irrigation increases to the farmland. Farming is good. They're able to control the flow of the Nile River. This is good for everyone who lives there. They increased the amount of land which was being farmed, again, increasing the amount of food that they could raise, crops that they could grow. They built a canal between the Nile River and the Red Sea, which aids in transportation. Arts, literature, architecture, all of these things grew and thrived and were improved upon during the Middle Kingdom. Sculptors created large wall carvings and statues of pharaohs, showing them as ordinary people rather than a godlike figure. Remember, Old Kingdom, we view the pharaoh as a living god. Middle Kingdom has a much more down-to-earth approach in how they view the pharaoh. They see the pharaoh as a normal person, but they're still the leader who is above all to be followed. They make the rules, they make the laws, but they're not a living God, not a living deity at this point in time. Okay? So we see again, as we look at the 8 features of civilization, art and architecture during the Middle Kingdom, that's when Egyptian art really flourishes. We think about a lot of the statues and paintings that we see of Egypt, and that dates back to Middle and New Kingdom time period. New form of architecture was also created. Instead of building pyramids, the pharaohs had their tombs cut into cliffs on the west side of the Nile River. This area came to be known as the Valley of Kings. We found hundreds of different tombs belonging to pharaohs and their families in the Valley of Kings. One of the most notable ones is the tomb of King Tut. We're going to talk about him more later on and why Tut was so important when we look at discoveries and things that we now know about ancient Egyptian culture. All right, here we go. All right, Middle Kingdom continued. Middle Kingdom came to an end around 1670 BC when a people group known as the Hyksos came in from Western Asia and attacked Egypt. They take over for about 100 years. And then when Egypt drives out the Hyksos, that's when the New Kingdom period starts. These Hyksos were mighty warriors. They crossed the desert in horse-drawn chariots and used weapons made out of bronze and iron. Okay, so their weapons were better than the Egyptians. They had the chariot, which gave them advantage. The Egyptians would learn how to use the chariot from the Hyksos, and ironically, they used these new weapons to drive the Hyksos out of Egypt later on. All right, Egyptians had always fought on foot with copper and stone weapons. They were no match for the invaders. The Hyksos come in, and they're very easily able to take over Egypt at this point and gain control of this empire. All right, during the New Kingdom, we're making that transition in a New Kingdom time period here. During the New Kingdom, Egypt acquired new territory and reached the height of its power. Ahmose, this is the name of one of the pharaohs, Ahmose's reign in Egypt began a period known as the New Kingdom. During this time, around 1550 BC, and it lasted until about 1080 BC, Egypt became far richer and more powerful than they had ever been in the past. All right, New Kingdom continued here. Around 1473 BC, a queen by the name of Hatshepsut came to power in Egypt. Now, again, we talk about this. This is a very important moment in history because up until this point, pharaohs had all been men. And when you look at any other civilization, their kings, their rulers had all been men. Now we have the first queen in Egypt. And not only is she a queen, she is very successful. And she is successful for the reasons that are listed here below. Hatshepsut was not interested in war. She didn't want to invade. She didn't want to expand her territory. She was interested in trade. Okay. It says rather than conquest. Conquest simply means fighting your neighbors to try to gain control of their land. Hatshepsut didn't want to do that. Egyptian traders during this time sailed across the eastern Mediterranean and across the south along the coast of Africa, and they began to trade. The economy grew. Egypt prospered. Everything is good under the rulership of Hatshepsut. One product that the Egyptians wanted to find was wood. Remember, not a lot of wood grows in Egypt. It's a desert area. You have some palm trees, but those aren't really good for constructing things. Palm wood is a relatively weak wood, so it's not good for building boats or houses or things like that. The Nile Valley has few trees, and Egyptians needed wood for their boats and for wood cabinets for the upper class that they like to have in their homes. And really, for any structure where you're going to use wood, you need to find it outside of Egypt. All right, the search for wood took Egyptian traders to the east coast of the Mediterranean Sea, where the country of Lebanon is located today. This is where Phoenicia is when we talked about Phoenicia earlier. This area had many trees, cedar trees in particular, and the people in the region, who were called the Phoenicians, were famous for their crafts. They made beautiful wooden furniture. They were among the first people to learn how to make glass. Remember, they made that out of heating up sand and shaping it into whatever form they wanted, and that creates glass. The Phoenicians used that for trading. All right, the Egyptians traded wheat as well as paper, gold, copper, their tools for Phoenician wood and furniture. The Phoenicians traded Egyptian goods to other people, and in this way, Egyptian food and goods spread all the way across the Middle East. Egypt's trade in the Eastern Mediterranean helped make their kingdom wealthier. So Egypt expands their economy, and they grow that by trade with the Phoenicians and trade with others. And their access to the Mediterranean Sea gives them this ability to trade with most of the other civilizations of the time that were within reach of ancient Egypt. All right, folks, that will wrap things up with our study of Egyptian government, the rise of government. I hope that you have learned something today. Please remember to go back and review. Make sure that you have filled in your note sheet and then you get that saved so that we can continue on and take a look at this later on in class. For my students watching this at home, you guys take care. We'll look forward to seeing you back in class soon. Until then, Take care.